A canvas bag hits a
bag is
glass
heavy.
desk. The sound is wrong for the room. Too heavy, too rough,
I
like a
can
brick
tell.
wrapped in fabric. The zipper opens. Stacks of $100 bills spill out, banded and thick, catching the showroom lights. The man in the purple suit doesn't reach for the money. He doesn't call security. Not yet. He laughs. Not a chuckle. A full, head-back, table-slapping laugh.
Where'd you
Like
steal
someone
this
just
from,
told him the
huh?
punchline of the year.
A
He
bank
points at the
truck?
old man standing across the desk. "Where'd you steal this from, huh? A bank truck?" The old man says nothing. He just watches the money settle. Before this morning is over, that same man in the purple suit will be begging someone else in this building not to fire him. Before this morning is over, everyone's standing in this showroom right now. The salesmen filming it on their phones. The security guard with his hand on his belt. The woman at the front desk who told him this wasn't a place for people like him. We'll find out exactly who they were laughing at. Have you ever watched a room full of people insult someone, right before they found out who he really was? 3 hours earlier, nobody in this dealership had any reason to think today was different from any other Tuesday. Arthur Pendelton was there to buy a car, the same way another man might walk into a grocery store to buy milk. No ceremony, no hesitation. But this wasn't a grocery store. This was a place built entirely on the idea that money announces itself. In a watch, a suit, a haircut, Arthur announced nothing, and in a room like that, silence reads as a threat or a joke. Today, it was about to become both. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Arthur Pendleton stepped onto a floor so polished it looked like still water. He didn't pause to take it in, didn't tilt his head back to admire the ceiling, 3 stories of glass and steel, funneling sunlight down onto a showroom that smelled faintly of leather and espresso. He just walked, the way a man walks when he's done this 1,000 times before, even though he hadn't. Not here, not in this building, not in this jacket. The jacket was the first thing anyone noticed, faded to the color of wet cardboard, the seams gone soft with age, one pocket stitched back on with thread that didn't match. Under it, a gray sweatshirt gone thin at the collar. His boots left the faintest print on the glass floor with every step. Not dirt exactly, just the mark of a man who walked more than he drove. Behind him, through the wall of windows, the city glittered, but nothing in the city glittered quite like what was waiting for him inside. A hypercar sat under a private spotlight near the back wall, angled just so, black paint so deep it looked like it was absorbing the room around it. The kind of car that didn't have a price tag so much as a phone call you had to make to find out. Arthur walked past it without slowing down, and that, more than anything, was what caught the attention of the 2 salesmen near the coffee bar. "That's not a customer," one of them murmured, not quietly enough. "That's a wrong turn," the other said, and they both went back to their phones. Arthur heard it. He always heard things like that. He'd learned a long time ago that people who dismiss you rarely bother to lower their voices. Why would they, when they've already decided you don't count? He didn't break stride. He didn't look at them. His eyes were already past them, moving across the floor toward the far corner, where a wall of glass sectioned off a private office from the rest of the showroom. The whole building was designed to make an entrance feel like an audition. Every salesman on the floor was watching without watching, cataloging the new arrival in half a second, the fabric, the shoes, the posture, and deciding, just as fast, whether he was worth the walk across the room. Arthur failed the audition before he'd made it 10 feet. Nobody offered him a coffee. Nobody asked if he needed help. 2 men in identical charcoal suits actually adjusted their path to avoid intersecting with his, the way people step around a puddle. Near the reception desk, a long, curved counter shaped like a comma, a woman in a fitted blazer glanced up from her tablet as he passed. She took him in with one practice sweep, top to bottom, and her mouth tightened into the thin, professional smile people use instead of an insult. "Sir," she said, not quite looking at him now, already returning her eyes to her screen. "If you're looking for the transit stop, it's back out the doors and to your left. This showroom is by appointment for our clients." Arthur didn't answer her. He didn't slow down either. He'd been told to leave by better-dressed people than her, in better rooms than this one, and he'd learned that the ones who say it first are rarely the ones who get the last word. He didn't need anyone's help anyway. He knew exactly where he was going. The office in the back corner had glass walls on 3 sides, the kind of transparency that was supposed to communicate openness, but really just meant everyone got to watch everyone else. Inside, a man sat with his feet up near the edge of a glass desk, leaning back in a wide leather chair, the color of aged whiskey, one ankle crossed over the opposite knee. His suit was a shade of purple that didn't occur naturally, anywhere except on runways and reality television, paired with a silk shirt patterned in gold that he'd left open 2 buttons too many. He was laughing at something on his phone when Arthur's reflection appeared in the glass behind him. Julian Vance didn't look up right away. He finished the video first, chuckled once more to himself, and only then swiveled the chair around. The practiced motion of a man, used to being the one who decided when a conversation started. Arthur didn't wait for an invitation. He walked past the 2 junior salespeople stationed like gatekeepers outside the office door, ignored the one who half raised a hand to stop him, and let himself in. "Can I help you?" Julian asked, in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. "I want to buy that car," Arthur said. His voice was low, even, unhurried, a voice that had said difficult things to difficult people before, and had never needed to raise itself to be heard. The black one, out front. Julian's eyebrows lifted, and for a second, something like amusement flickered behind his eyes, the kind that comes right before a joke you already know is cruel. He looked Arthur up and down, slow and deliberate, the way you'd inspect something you were about to throw away. "That car," Julian said, "costs more than your whole block." "I'm aware," Arthur said. "Is this some kind of prank? Did one of the guys on the floor send you in here?" Julian glanced past Arthur's shoulder, as if expecting a camera crew to jump out laughing. When nothing did, his expression hardened into something flatter, less playful. "Look, old man, I don't know what you're doing in here, but this isn't a shelter. This isn't a place you wander into to warm up. We sell $100,000 cars to people who can afford $100,000 cars. You need to leave before I have someone walk you out. Or call the police, if that's what it takes." Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply reached down, unslung the worn canvas duffel bag from his shoulder, and set it on the glass desk between them. The desk rang faintly under the weight of it, like a bell struck once. Julian looked at the bag the way you'd look at something a dog dragged in from outside. "What is that?" "Open it," Arthur said. For a moment, Julian didn't move. Some instinct in him, hesitating, even as his mouth kept talking. "I'm not touching whatever's in a bag that smells like a bus station." "Open it," Arthur said again, and something in the stillness of his voice made even the salesman loitering outside the glass go quiet. Julian rolled his eyes, more for the benefit of anyone watching than out of any real concern, and unzipped it himself, if only to prove a point and get this over with faster. The zipper caught for a second, then gave, and the bag fell open under its own weight. Stacks of $100 bills spilled out across the glass, banded in neat paper wraps, more cash in one place than most people in that building had ever seen outside of a screen. It wasn't a few bills for show. It was dense, heavy, real. Stack after stack, packed so tightly the bag had strained to hold its shape. For a second, nobody in the office said anything at all. Then Julian threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh, or even an incredulous one. It was loud, uncontrolled, the kind of laugh that came from somewhere theatrical, meant to be heard well beyond the glass walls of his office. He slapped his palm flat against the desk, once, twice, like he was trying to keep time with his own amusement. "Oh, this is incredible," he wheezed, wiping at the corner of one eye. "This is... okay, somebody's definitely filming this, right? Where's the camera?" He turned in his chair, scanning the salesmen gathering just outside the glass, several of whom had already drifted closer. pulled in by the sound the way passers-by slow down for an accident on the highway. "That's counterfeit," Julian said, jabbing a finger toward the pile. "Or stolen. There's no way, no way." A man walks in here, off the street, with a bag full of real hundreds. "You know what happens to people who try to pass fake bills in a place like this? You know how many cameras are in this room right now?" Arthur said nothing. He stood exactly as he had since he walked in, spine straight, hands loose at his sides, watching Julian's performance with the patient. Unblinking calm of a man who had sat through worse. "Security!" Julian called out, still grinning, pointing at Arthur like he was presenting evidence in a courtroom built entirely for his own entertainment. "Come see this! Come see what wandered in off the sidewalk." More salesmen pressed close to the glass now, a small crowd forming the way one always does. Not to help, just to watch. A couple of them had their phones half raised, recording without quite deciding to record. The way people do when they sense something is about to become a story worth telling later. Julian fed off it, his laughter climbing louder with every new face at the window, his finger still aimed at Arthur like an accusation. "Look at him," Julian said to the gathering crowd, delighted, wiping his eyes again. "Look at this man. You walk into a dealership like this." He gestured grandly around the showroom, at the hypercar glowing under its spotlight, at the marble and the glass and the espresso machine hissing steam near the entrance. "In that jacket, with that bag, and you expect anyone in here to believe you're buying anything besides a bus ticket." He was laughing so hard now that his next words came out in gasps, barely words at all, just delighted, cruel little bursts of sound aimed across the desk at a man who hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't so much as raised his voice since the moment he walked through the door. Arthur only watched him laugh. There was no anger in his face, no hurt, just the quiet, patient attention of someone who had seen this exact performance before, in one form or another, more times than he cared to count, and who understood, better than anyone else in that glass office, exactly how the rest of the afternoon was about to go. Julian didn't wait to catch his breath before he snapped his fingers, twice, sharp and impatient, the universal signal of a man who has never had to ask twice for anything in his life, and pointed past Arthur toward the showroom floor, where a security guard in a dark uniform had already begun moving toward the glass office, pulled in by the same commotion as everyone else. "Officer Davis," Julian called, still grinning, still riding the high of his own performance. "Get this gentleman out of my office. And take the bag. All of it. We'll let the police sort out where a man dressed like that got his hands on." He gestured at the money with theatrical disgust. "Whatever this is." Officer Davis was a broad, stern-faced man who had clearly worked enough of these showroom floors to know that most days involved nothing more dangerous than a customer arguing about financing terms. He stepped into the office with the careful, measured posture of someone trained to de-escalate, rather than provoke, one hand resting near his belt out of habit, rather than actual threat, and positioned himself just behind Arthur's left shoulder. "Sir," Davis said, his voice low, almost apologetic, the voice of a man doing a job he didn't particularly enjoy. "I'm going to need you to come with me." Arthur didn't turn to look at him. His eyes stayed on Julian, steady and unreadable, the same expression he'd worn since walking through the front doors of the dealership that morning. Patient, unhurried, the look of a man watching a storm build in the distance and declining to run from it. "You're welcome to try," Arthur said quietly, "but I'd think carefully before you touch the bag." It wasn't a threat. There was no heat in it, no raised volume, nothing that could be mistaken for aggression. If anything, it sounded almost like advice, offered without malice, the way a stranger might warn you about ice on a sidewalk. But something in the flatness of it, the total absence of fear where fear should have been, made Officer Davis hesitate for half a second longer than professional instinct usually allowed. Julian noticed the hesitation and rolled his eyes, already reaching for his phone again, as though Arthur's calm was simply one more part of the entertainment. "Oh, don't tell me you're intimidated," he said, laughing under his breath. Look at him. He's wearing a beanie he probably found in a donation bin. Get him out. Davis's hand closed gently around Arthur's upper arm. More guidance than force. The kind of touch meant to communicate direction, rather than dominance. Arthur allowed it, taking one small step back from the desk without resistance, his expression unchanged, his gaze never leaving Julian's face. 2 more employees had drifted to the office doorway now, crowding the frame, phones raised at slightly different angles, as if competing for the best view of whatever was about to happen. Somewhere among them, a woman murmured something about calling this the best Tuesday of the year, and a ripple of laughter answered her, low and complicit, the sound of a crowd that had already decided which side of the joke it wanted to stand on. Arthur let himself be turned, unhurried, toward the door. He didn't reach for the bag. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice, didn't do any of the things a cornered man is supposed to do. He simply moved at his own pace, half a step ahead of Davis's guiding hand, as though he were the one choosing the direction, and Davis merely happened to be walking alongside him. Behind them, Julian had picked up one of the loose bands of $100 bills from where it sat nearest the edge of the desk, holding it up between 2 fingers, like a man displaying evidence at a trial, turning it slowly for the benefit of the small crowd gathered at his door. "I want this photographed," he announced, grinning at his audience, "before whatever police officer they send over here tries to tell me it's real. This is the funniest thing that has ever happened on this floor, and I have been in this business 14 years. He was still holding it up, still savoring the moment, when the wide glass doors at the far end of the showroom slid open with a soft hiss, and the entire tenor of the room shifted before anyone standing in Julian's office even understood why. Elias Thorne moved the way certain men move, through buildings they own but rarely visit, with the particular, unhurried authority of someone who has never once in his career had to check whether a room was paying attention to him. He wore a suit so precisely tailored it looked stitched directly onto his shoulders. Navy, severe, paired with a white shirt so crisp it seemed to hold its own shape independent of the body beneath it. He hadn't announced his visit. He rarely did. Surprise inspections were, in Elias's private philosophy of management, the only kind worth conducting, because a showroom on its best behavior told you nothing, and a showroom caught being itself told you everything. He'd barely made it 3 steps past the entrance when the sound reached him. Not the ordinary murmur of commerce, the polite hum of salesmen and customers he expected to hear, but something sharper, more chaotic, a crowd noise with an edge to it that he recognized instantly and did not like. He followed it the way a man follows smoke to find the fire, cutting across the marble floor at a pace just short of a jog, past the gleaming hypercar under its private spotlight, past a cluster of confused customers, who parted automatically at the sight of him, the way crowds part for people who radiate consequence. By the time he reached the glass-walled office, a dozen employees had gathered at its door and windows, phones raised, laughter rolling in uneven waves, and at the center of it, framed by his own glass walls like an animal in an aquarium, Julian Vance stood, holding a band of $100 bills aloft, while a security guard escorted an old man in a battered jacket toward the exit. Elias pushed through the crowd without a word of apology, his shoulder clipping past one salesman, hard enough to make the young man stumble half a step, phone still raised, still filming, oblivious to whose path he'd just blocked. Elias didn't spare him a glance. His eyes were fixed entirely on the scene unfolding inside the glass box, on Julian's grinning face, on the guard's hand resting against an old man's arm, and then, as he closed the last few feet of distance, on the old man's face itself. Something in Elias's expression went still, then it went pale. Then, in the space of a single heartbeat, it curdled into something far darker. Not confusion, not surprise exactly, but the specific, sickening horror of a man watching a mistake unfold in real time that he understands, immediately and completely, cannot be undone with an apology. "Stop," Elias said, and though he didn't raise his voice, something in the word cut cleanly through the noise of the crowd, silencing 3 separate conversations at once. "Stop right now." Officer Davis froze mid-step, his hand still loosely curled around Arthur's arm, glancing toward Elias with the confused deference of a man who recognized authority when it entered a room, even if he didn't yet understand what it was reacting to. Julian, still holding his little band of $100 bills like a trophy, turned toward the sound of Elias's voice with the easy, unbothered smile of a man who assumed reinforcements had arrived to help him enjoy the joke. "Elias, perfect timing. You will not believe." He didn't get to finish the sentence. Elias walked straight past him. It wasn't a subtle thing. He didn't glance at Julian, didn't acknowledge the money in his hand, didn't so much as slow his stride as he crossed the last stretch of the office and reached the glass desk, where a small brass dish sat holding a single set of keys, the master set for the black hypercar glowing under its spotlight on the floor beyond the glass. Elias's hand closed around them without hesitation, and he turned, in one continuous motion, toward Arthur. The crowd at the door had gone quiet in that particular way. Crowds go quiet when they sense, all at once, and without being told, that the story they thought they were watching has just become a different story entirely. Elias leaned across the desk, not gently, not the polished, practiced lean of a salesman closing a deal, but the aggressive, full-weight lean of a man closing distance, because the moment demanded urgency. His knuckles pressed white against the glass, his face inches from where Julian still stood frozen, with his little band of cash held stupidly aloft. He didn't look at Julian at all. His eyes were fixed entirely on Arthur, and when he spoke, his voice carried the particular tightness of controlled fury, not shouted, not even loud, but strung so taut it seemed to vibrate. "Sir," Elias said, and the word landed in that glass office like a verdict. He extended the keys toward Arthur with both hands, the way one might present something sacred, his knuckles still faintly trembling with whatever mixture of horror and adrenaline was moving through him. "Mr. Pendelton, I don't have the words. Please, take these, please." The silence that followed was total. Somewhere near the door, one of the phones recording the scene actually dropped an inch, its owner's grip going slack with shock. Officer Davis's hand fell away from Arthur's arm entirely, as though the contact had suddenly become something he needed to apologize for. Julian blinked. The trophy band of $100 bills was still pinched between his fingers, forgotten now, hanging limp at his side. "I'm sorry. Pendelton? You know this guy?" "Know him," Elias repeated, and something close to a laugh escaped him, though there was no humor left in it anywhere. A short, disbelieving exhale, the sound a man makes when he's watched his entire week collapse in under a minute. He straightened up slightly, though he didn't step back from the desk, didn't ease the intensity radiating off him, his eyes finally cutting toward Julian, with a fury so total, it seemed to physically dim the color in Julian's face. "Julian, do you have any idea whose showroom you've been laughing in?" It's my showroom," Julian said, though the certainty had already started leaking out of his voice, replaced by something thinner, more uncertain, a man realizing mid-sentence that the ground he was standing on had quietly become unstable beneath him. "It was your showroom," Elias said. "This building, that car, the land underneath both of them. All of it sits inside a holding structure, controlled by Anthem Meridian Capital." He let the name hang there for a beat, watching it land against Julian's face and find nothing, because of course it found nothing, because men like Julian rarely bothered to learn the names above the names that actually owned what they thought belonged to them. Anthem Meridian holds the majority position in this franchise, 61%, last I checked. "Mr. Pendelton here," Elias said, and his voice caught slightly on the word here, as though he still couldn't quite believe he was saying it aloud. "In this room, under these circumstances, is Anthem Meridian." The band of $100 bills slipped from Julian's fingers and landed on the glass desk with a soft, papery slap. He owns the company that owns this dealership. Elias continued, relentless now, each word delivered like a blow he'd been saving up for exactly this moment. He owns the parent company that licenses every franchise in this network. And as it happens, as it very specifically happens, Julian, he also owns the land this entire building sits on, every square foot of it. Which means that for the last several minutes, you have been laughing, in front of a dozen witnesses and at least 3 cameras, at the man who could dissolve your franchise agreement before lunch if he felt like it. Julian's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, producing nothing. Arthur, for his part, still hadn't moved much. He stood exactly where Officer Davis had released him, the canvas bag still open on the desk, its stacks of $100 bills sitting undisturbed in the tense silence that had swallowed the room. His face carried no triumph, no smugness, none of the satisfaction a lesser man might have allowed himself in a moment like this. If anything, he looked faintly, quietly tired, the expression of someone who had done this exact kind of test before, in other rooms, with other people, and had hoped, without much real expectation, that this particular room might have proven him wrong. "The money," Elias said, glancing down at the bag, understanding arriving on his face in stages. "Wasn't for the car, was it?" "No," Arthur said. It was the first thing he'd said since Officer Davis had touched his arm, and his voice was as calm and unbothered as it had been at the start of the morning, as though nothing that had happened in between, the mockery, the guard, the crowd with their phones, had cost him anything at all. "The car, I could have bought with a phone call. The bag is the exact figure required under Section 12 of the franchise agreement to exercise a forced buyout of any partner's remaining equity stake, should that partner be found in material breach of the network's conduct standards." He paused, and for the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, but a kind of quiet, settled certainty. The look of a man closing a door he'd left open on purpose, just to see who would walk through it. "I activated the clause this morning, before I ever walked through your front doors, Mr. Vance. All I needed today was a witness." Julian's face had gone the color of the marble floor beneath him. You can't. There's a process. There are lawyers. You can't just. There is a process," Elias said, cutting him off without raising his voice, without needing to. "It's already been filed. I signed off on the notice myself this morning, before I drove out here, because Mr. Pendelton called me personally at 6 a.m. and told me exactly what to expect, and exactly why. I came for a surprise inspection today, because he asked me to. He wanted to see, with his own eyes, what kind of dealership you were running when you thought no one important was watching." The crowd gathered at the office door had gone almost unnervingly still, phones still raised but forgotten now, the earlier laughter having curdled into something closer to second-hand embarrassment, the specific discomfort of watching someone's entire public identity collapse in real time. A few of the employees exchanged glances, already recalculating, in the private arithmetic people do in moments like this, exactly how enthusiastically they'd laughed a few minutes earlier, and how visible they'd been while doing it. Julian looked around the office, at the crowd, at the phones, at the money on his desk, at Elias's unwavering fury, at Arthur's unreadable calm, and seemed, for the first time since Arthur had walked into his office, to genuinely understand the size of the hole he'd dug for himself. "Sir," he started, turning toward Arthur, his voice cracking slightly around the word, all the earlier mockery gone from it now, replaced by something desperate and small. "Mr. Pendelton, if I had known." "That's exactly the problem," Arthur said quietly. "You shouldn't have needed to know." It landed harder than anything shouted could have. Julian had no response to it, and for once, he didn't try to manufacture one. Elias straightened fully, smoothing the front of his jacket, with one hand in the automatic, unconscious gesture of a man trying to reassemble his own composure after a moment of pure adrenaline, and turned back toward Arthur, the keys still extended between them. "Sir," he said again, softer this time. "The car is yours. Whatever you need. Paperwork, delivery, anything at all. My team will handle it personally, today, and I will be personally overseeing the transition of this location's management. Effective immediately." Arthur reached out and took the keys from Elias's hand. They were lighter than the bag had been, absurdly so, for something that supposedly represented over $1 million of engineering and design, and he closed his fingers around them without ceremony, the same unhurried calm he'd carried since walking through the front doors that morning. "Thank you, Elias," he said. Then, glancing once more at Julian, not with cruelty, not with the satisfaction of a man enjoying a victory, but with something closer to disappointment, the particular disappointment of someone who had genuinely hoped, against experience, to be proven wrong, he added, "I hope the next person who runs this floor remembers that the only people worth trusting are the ones who treat you the same whether or not they think you're worth anything." Julian said nothing. There was nothing left in him to say. He stood behind his own glass desk, in his own glass office, in the building he no longer controlled, surrounded by employees who had, only minutes earlier, been laughing along with him and were now very carefully not meeting his eyes, their phones lowering one by one as the entertainment they'd been filming curdled into something they no longer wanted evidence of having enjoyed. Arthur bent down, unhurried, and gathered the stacks of $100 bills back into the canvas bag, tucking the loose band Julian had dropped back in among the others, with the same careful, deliberate motion he'd used to unzip it in the first place. He drew the zipper closed, the twist of bare wire catching for half a second before giving way, and slung the bag back over his shoulder, the weight of it settling against his hip, exactly as it had when he'd first walked through the dealership's front doors. Nobody moved to stop him this time. Nobody dared. He walked out of the glass office the way he'd walked into it, unhurried, upright, his expression as calm and unreadable as it had been from the very first moment his boots had touched the polished marble floor. The crowd that had gathered to watch his humiliation parted now in near total silence. The same salesmen who had turned their backs on him earlier that morning, suddenly finding an urgent need to study their own shoes. The woman at the comma-shaped reception desk, lowering her eyes as he passed, none of them quite able to meet the gaze of the man they'd all, in one way or another, decided wasn't worth their attention only an hour before. Elias walked with him partway, half a step behind, speaking quietly about delivery logistics and paperwork that could all be handled remotely, about a formal apology he intended to draft personally, about changes he planned to make at this location before the week was out. Arthur listened, nodded once or twice, but didn't slow his pace, didn't linger, didn't give the moment any more weight than it needed. Near the entrance, beneath the hypercar's private spotlight, he paused only long enough to run one weathered hand along the vehicle's front fender. A brief, almost sentimental gesture, the closest thing to genuine excitement he'd allowed himself all morning, before continuing toward the glass doors. They slid open for him without a sound, the same way they had when he'd arrived, and he stepped back out into the ordinary daylight of the parking lot, canvas bag over one shoulder, a fresh set of keys in his other hand, exactly as calm, exactly as unbothered, exactly as quietly, immovably himself as he had been 3 hours earlier, when nobody in that building had thought he was worth a second look. Behind him, through the glass, Julian Vance remained standing in the wreckage of his own office, surrounded by staff who no longer laughed, in a building that, as of this morning, was no longer his, a man who had spent his entire career learning to read a room by the cut of a person's clothes, and who had finally, too late, learned the one lesson that mattered most, that the quietest person in the room is very often the one holding all the leverage, and that the cost of finding that out the hard way is a debt no amount of money can repay.